Boys, Godtree is back and the stakes are higher than ever. We pick up where we left off with Lil Panda sending off the remnants of Australia's beast force. Meanwhile, Godtree was beginning to realize that having too much of a moral backbone was hindering his progress. After defeating Darkness, he gained a hopping 120 million evolution points to spend. It was the largest haul he had ever scored. The first ability he decided to invest in was his mastery over mists. Upon reaching level 5, the ability evolved to create undying mist beasts. Additionally, he unlocked the dimension of mist. With another dimension added, his combat power should increase by leaps and bounds. Testing his newly upgraded ability, he summoned an undying mist beast in the form of a kangaroo. It had the strength of a transcendent third order and appeared much more materialized. White Tiger analyzed the new mist kangaroo, thinking it was pretty weak. That earned him quite a few lashings from the boss. Godtree entered his new dimension to check out what was inside. There he found numerous mist beasts in a variety of forms. They seemed to be the souls of creatures that had died. Now that he could throw in darkness, he might have gained access to the space of the dead. He also noticed that the stronger mist beasts were absorbing the souls of the weaker ones. After a single trip inside, the kangaroo mist had already reached the fourth order of transcendence. It seemed like cultivating them would not be a problem, but what Godtree really wanted to unlock was the dimension of darkness. Maybe unlocking that dimension could be achieved with the help of a certain someone. That someone was none other than the Dark Dragon himself, Thunder Dragon's father. Godtree sent out one of his void roots to check on the father and son. By this point, both dragons' injuries had mostly recovered. Dark Dragon had gained a newfound respect and gratitude for Godtree's benevolence. Godtree just thought it would be useful to have another dragon on the team, so he managed to heal the big one, since dragons only need a sliver of life to fully revive. He asked Dark Dragon if there were any dark attribute mineral ores in Australia. It turned out there were, at the peak of the tallest mountain in the northwest region. The previous king of Australia held a monopoly on ores. That was just what Godtree needed right now. So he hurriedly sent one of his roots to survey the land, excited to unlock a new dimension. It didn't take long to unearth the riches hiding at the peak of the mountain. Godtree's void root exploded into the mines, and he was awestruck by the sight of so many dark attribute ores. By his estimation, this should be enough to open the dimension he wanted. The big-bodied mammoth, Glacier, was tasked with transporting every ore back to their home base. After a single trip, Glacier managed to bring the ores back to the boss. Using his roots and branches, Godtree began absorbing their essence. The process produced quite a dark aura surrounding him. Concentrating his focus on opening a new dimension, signs of success started showing. Finally, he was able to open the ominous gate to the dimension of darkness. It came with a divine ability, Darkness Domain, and a powerful field ability that erased the enemy's perception. Bro just literally became Gojo at this point. Testing it out immediately, the entire area was swallowed by a pitch-black dome. His forces started freaking out, thinking they were under attack or something. The effect of wiping away all perceptions inside the domain was a very promising combat tool. Even transcendent fourth-order beasts like White Tiger were affected, acting like headless flies. Upon canceling his domain expansion, he looked at the remaining dark ores with glee. There were still a ton of them to absorb. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. Godtree was busy turning a barren desert into a healthy forest with an abundance of trees. As for the humans, they convened for another world conference, including the elites of each country. The venue was none other than Inferno City. This was the place at the center of innovation. They were the first to integrate spirit power into machines, building a defense system capable of thwarting beast tides. The conference would mainly discuss humanity's next move after the Darkness incident and the logistical problem of ruined Australia. In the diverse continent of Europe, a powerhouse had risen above all others, the Vatican. Their representatives were excited to finally have a discussion with the rest of the world powers. The 10 Nations Alliance, secretly controlled by Godtree, was also attending the conference. News of this summit quickly reached Godtree's ears, thanks to his peregrine falcon network of information. Yu Li, the master of magnetism, was spearheading the conference for the sake of humanity's future. Maybe the existential threat of darkness was enough to finally unite the world. Godtree dismissed that idea as a joke, though humanity would never be united, even after 100 of these conferences. Meanwhile, he was busy extracting the rich resources of Australia, scouring the land for multiple ore mines. It's just a pity that he couldn't find any light attribute ores wherever he looked. At least his 9 great dimensions have expanded greatly, especially mist and darkness. His goal is to reach 10,000 meters. With everything taken care of, he passed down the order to leave Australia in 5 days. Out of nowhere, God Tree started sensing strange fluctuations from his void tree root. He entered his void dimension to check it out, and his eyes shone with curiosity at what he saw. There was a green planet in the middle of the nothingness. Curious, he started moving toward the singular planet. He had his void tree root wander around the endless space of the void, breaking through plane after plane. And this time, he managed to spot a planet filled with vitality. Since ancient times, humans have been searching for extraterrestrial life forms, so this was a huge discovery. He dove deep into the strange planet, and upon breaking through its atmosphere, he found a lush land filled with greenery. God Tree also saw a figure of a woman walking through the forested area. Upon closer examination, this humanoid existence had a few key differences from humans. Nevertheless, this was a groundbreaking discovery. Back on Earth, God Tree tried to think of the implications of his new breakthrough. Unfortunately, such a long-distance exploration was way too draining in terms of spirit power. But you believe that what he saw was akin to an elf. They should be an advanced race with an innate affinity for elemental powers. To find a planet inhabited by advanced life forms was game-changing. He could only hope that the green planet did not have any sixth-order transcendent beings or anything crazy like that. Now that darkness is gone, thanks to the system, he could only depend on his own grind to get stronger. Suddenly, Little Panda extended a message that the orca wanted to meet with the boss. At the shorelines, God Tree met the orca with his void root. It turned out that they had gained the majority of control over the sea. With 5 of the 7 Sea Kings dead, conflicts for the thrones were rising. This would be the perfect chance to solidify their footing and conquer the remaining sea tribes for a full takeover. God Tree also felt that this was the perfect time to expand their reach underwater, so he approved Orca's plan. He also asked where Serpent was. As if on cue, the shoreline waters were disturbed by a gigantic wave. Underneath was the humongous mutated Great Serpent, which had already reached the 4th order of transcendence. He was even up to 8 heads now. His growth was beyond God Tree's expectations. Furthermore, the serpent could use fear to feed his growth rate. The more feared he could devour, the stronger he could become. Now that he had reached the appropriate stage, it was time to leave the water and join the rest of the main force on land. Meanwhile, Orca was tasked with overseeing any developments underwater while preserving strength. From the skies came White Tiger and Xiao Lan, flying with a sense of urgency. It turned out that the subordinates of darkness had shown up once again.
We do not care.
The subordinate she was referring to was the Hooded Cat. She stood before God Tree to plead allegiance and join their forces. The Black Cat wanted to repay God Tree's kindness for sparing the kangaroo. He accepted her pledge and assigned her as one of the guards. She seemed sincere in her desire to serve, so it shouldn't be a problem to let her in, right? Meanwhile, Xiao Lan and White Tiger were staring at the 8-headed serpent in shock. The last time White Tiger saw him, he was just a tiny snake, vulnerable to kidnappings. Xiao Lan was not expecting to personally witness another legendary creature, but here they were. Since they were on the topic of sizes, Emperor Alligator popped up, refusing to be outdone. His entrance got White Tiger's fur wet with salt water. Though, Demon Cow and Qinggang looked at the serpent fondly. They did not expect such exponential growth. Like the others, Demon Cow could still remember the baby snake from a few years ago. Thorn also recalled the time when Emperor Alligator wasn't as big as he is now. They were witnesses to these insane growth spurts. Lung Feng teased the Emperor, recalling the time when he was so frightened of dying in a previous battle. Back when they were normal humans, Qinggang, Thorn, and Lung Feng were almost eaten by White Tiger. The Tempest Wolves also reminisced about the first year, when Xiao Ling and Xiao Qing were attacked by the Cleaving Axe Serpent, a time of grieving after their first collective battle. Tyrannotitan was shocked to hear these untold stories, as he was quite a late addition to the team. As far as Glacier knew, Ninetails and the Peregrine Falcons were the first to join God Tree, but they didn't know the whole story of how it all began. Since everyone was in a nostalgic mood, Ninetails agreed to tell the story of the early days with God Tree. The days when she was just a helpless fox, being hunted down by the Cleaving Axe Serpent. While the beasts were having their story time, the boss was busy cultivating his radiant energy. The 5 days of prep time to leave Australia ended quickly, and all the beasts started entering the 9 great dimensions. Dark Dragon, also known as Nether, decided to leave on his own as well. The gang's next destination was Africa, an ancient continent known for its variety of wildlife even before the Age of Transcendence began. Since the start of spirit tides, all information regarding Africa had been closed off from the public. At this moment, a hunt between a man and a gigantic bird was taking place. With his axe, the man persistently chased after the escaping beast with vigor. He managed to jump into the sky and deliver the bird's demise. It only took one cleave to take the bird down, leaving a gaping wound. This mutated human had the barbarian bloodline coursing through his veins, giving him the physique and strength of a killer. The bird would serve as food for his village for a few days. From afar, Godtree's roots were starting to map out the land, surveying it for any relevant details. He was not expecting to see another one of the legendary races inhabiting the land. With their physique, strength, and outstanding battle awareness, barbarians transcended human capabilities. Godtree wanted to test something out, so he opened the dimension of life in front of the barbarian hunter. Surprised and clueless as to what had just appeared in front of him, the hunter recoiled in fear. Then came the mutated 8-headed serpent, snatching his prey and establishing dominance. The hunter helplessly watched as the beast tore the bird apart limb from limb. Upon seeing the hunter, the serpent turned its aggression towards him. Desperate, the hunter jumped with inhuman agility to avoid the attack. He knew that he would die if he tried to fight, so escaping was his only choice. But even that option was not possible, as the divine flower cut off his escape route. With a burst of her vigorous power, the barbarian was swept away. Under divine flower's power, the aggressive hunter turned into a catatonic fool. Little Panda had also arrived, praising divine flower for such a great takedown. Infatuated with the panda, divine flower was on cloud 9. Godtree delegated the task of finding out more information about the barbarians to Nine Tails. Meanwhile, it was about time for him to find an appropriate place to lay his roots and establish a base. After finding an area with ample space, Godtree's main body burst out of the ground and massive clearing in the greenery. Next up would be formally starting the hunt. Opening his dimensions, the beasts of Misty Mountains started pouring into Africa, one by one. Bro was on his villainous colonizer arc. At the forefront of this new conquest were Sparky and his ant army, scouring the lands for spirit stone mines. The Tiger tribe arrived with their usual intensity, eager to find valuable treasures. Emperor Alligator took charge of the reptilians, aiming to dominate the continent. As Godtree unleashed his forces, he suddenly felt something noteworthy. He could sense two significant auras nearby that warranted inspection. After digging through the land, he discovered an earth spirit stone mine ripe for harvest. Nearby, he found a fire spirit stone mine with an equal density of ores. Two valuable ore veins had revealed themselves unexpectedly. This must be a good omen for what Africa could offer. While he was laughing in celebration, a nearby village sensed his presence and the formidable spirit power overflowing from him. The old chief reckoned that the source must be the giant tree that appeared on the plains out of nowhere. They could feel a constant wave of gentle spirit power emanating from the golden tree. Some villagers were aware of the demonic tree from Huasia, but it seemed implausible to find that monster in their lands. As far as the chief knew, Godtree should still be in Australia, not in their ancestral domain. The only way to be sure was to investigate, so the villagers quickly formed a team of bear-riding warriors, with the goal of chopping the tree down to make beds. Meanwhile, the barbarian Imperial City also received news of the tree's appearance. The transcendent Fourth Order barbarian emperor smiled at the enormous spirit power that had appeared in the vicinity of the bear tribe. Since the bear tribe had already sent out people to investigate, perhaps the Imperial City should as well. The barbarian emperor stood from his throne, determined to check out the fuss himself. This sudden emergence also attracted the attention of Africa's beasts. One of them was the transcendent Fourth Order snow lion. The lone beast watched from afar, sensing and evaluating the situation. Africa's elephants and insects took a more aggressive approach, heading directly for the tree's position. One of the cleverer beasts, a black snake, was still debating whether he should join this brewing storm too. All the creatures of Africa were in an uproar. Godtree's horrifying spirit power was affecting even Fourth Order creatures. They had all come to a collective agreement to chase away the outsider from their land immediately. If they didn't cooperate now, the tree would likely take over their land soon. Most importantly, every part of Godtree's body could be considered an irresistible treasure. Yu Ziyu was well aware of this large-scale coalition approaching him. He also knew they were tempted by his treasured parts, not to mention his life essence. So he tasked his commanders to ensure that not a single beast came close as he absorbed his spirit stone harvest. Little Panda and his team were starting to worry at the sheer number of powerhouses inching closer. Godtree had just finished fighting darkness, the strongest being on the planet. Now, he had to deal with the forces of an entire continent again. Demon Cow was currently out of commission, as he was trying to break through inside the dimension of thunder. Likewise, Thorn was busy breaking through inside the Earth's dimension. God Tree reckoned that the beasts he had in Tao would be enough to handle Africa, though. The Bear Tribe warriors were the first to get close. Their area used to be a modest grassland, but it was now a sea of trees. As they approached, the horror of God Tree's spirit power became more apparent. While they were busy sneaking in, they were discovered by one of the heaviest and strongest factions in Misty Mountain's army. The Arctic Bear quickly dispatched the first warrior with a single bite, devouring half of his body. Polar bears had no business being in this part of the world, yet here they were. And so, the skirmish between the Bear Tribe and the actual bears commenced. The same could be said for the Tiger Tribe and the Pride of Lions, under the command of Snow Lion. White Tiger wanted his roar to set the pace of the battle, but he was upstaged by the previous leader of the tribe. White Tiger complained, but was scolded by Xiao Lan for being immature, instead of leading through combat. Aside from the roars of lions, the rumbling trumpets of elephants could also be heard. The faction that met their charge was the Great Apes under King Kong. This section of the battlefield was a contest of pure strength. Elephants versus apes, which side are you betting on? How many wars do you want?
Another one.
The elephants effectively used their larger size to trample the apes, but the apes were no pushovers and immediately went for the legs. Sure, the elephants were big, but the apes had superior, humongous strength, enough to throw the front lines into the air. Like a bowling ball heading for the pins, the attack quickly disrupted the trampling. Things were looking good for King Kong and his crew, but that quickly changed when a mutated elephant took to the stage. This black elephant had some blue discoloration in its skin and possessed a superior aura. With one swift motion, it filled the battlefield with raging water. The waves swept away the apes in one go, stealing their momentum. From afar, Little Panda and Nine Tails watched, as the land transformed into a catch basin filled with water. The apes were quickly losing ground, and their white-furred commander was nowhere to be found. That was because the Great Ape was in the midst of breaking through. Bro was sitting like a villain. That's plus 1,000 aura points. His evolution was surprisingly heading in the direction of a human form. God Tree watched as the Great Ape wrapped up his level up. Upon finishing, he immediately asked for God Tree's orders. The Great Ape had evolved into something akin to an entirely new species of human. If humanity discovered this fact, another war might start. Moreover, he was now emanating a malicious aura with tremendous power. So, God Tree decided to give him a spirit ring to calm the malicious energy, preventing a berserk state. The Great Ape gladly wore the artifact and thanked his master. Since the Ape Clan had already engaged in combat, they needed their commander with them. Without wasting another second, a shredded humanoid ape jumped out of the dimension to lead his troops. The apes might be evolving into superhumans in the future. If that happened, the course of human history would be altered. On the battlefield, the water elephant was dominating the apes all by himself. After flooding the land, he was now hurling rocks with insane accuracy. The apes were no match for such a bizarre enemy. Almost all of them were heavily injured, some had died, and some were on the brink of death. As the water elephant pushed forth to finish the job once and for all, Little Panda wanted to go ahead and provide some much-needed support, but it seemed that wouldn't be necessary as the Great Ape had arrived. Little Panda and Nine Tails were taken aback by the breakneck speed of the rushing beast. By the time the water elephant sensed the new speeding presence, it was too late. The Great Ape opened with a devastating punch that sent the water elephant flying, shattering one of its tusks. The difference in size was staggering, but the difference in strength was even more so. The Great Ape growled, seemingly going Super Saiyan with his increased aura. The air bent, as he demonstrated terrifying speed. What came next was a beatdown in overwhelming proportions, as he rained down punch after punch on the mutated elephant. Even the elite fighters on the sidelines were impressed with his speed. After what seemed like 1,000 punches, the water elephant finally buckled under the accumulation of injuries. But its durability cannot be understated. It still had enough energy and grit to retaliate. But tanking one full-powered attack triggered the Great Ape's innate talent, converting the injuries he sustained into strength. Holding onto the mutated elephant's trunk, the Great Ape yanked as hard as he could until he finally ripped the entire trunk from the elephant's face. After bleeding out at a fatal rate, the giant beast was finally brought down. The Great Ape bravely stood before the remaining elephants and taunted them with a bloody roar. God Tree molded a humanoid form to observe the fight and couldn't help but praise the great ape's power. If that guy continued to grow, he would definitely become one of God Tree's sharpest blades. On the other side of the field was the clash between the bulls and Sparky's insect army. Sparky entered the fight with a bang, as they executed the entire vanguard of bulls with a quadruple strike. But they were caught off guard by the enemy's second prong of attack, consisting of hungry ants coming from the flank. Thankfully, they were bailed out by the flames of 9 tails, obliterating the enemy ants. She alone would be enough to deal with a whole army of enemies. Rhino beasts running at full speed, deadly wasps fill in the skies, monstrous gazelles looking for prey. These were the factions greedily heading for war against God Tree's soldiers. Fortunately, Little Panda and the high-level Misty Mountain troops were enough to keep them at bay. With more and more enemies appearing, God Tree was starting to consider providing support. To add to their headaches, an even more problematic faction had joined, marching to the beat of their war drums. It was none other than the Imperial Barbarians, riding in on their massive wooden platform led by the Barbarian Emperor himself. He stood at the forefront with an expectant smile on his face. They came here ignoring the small-time beasts, directly targeting Hua Siya's mutant tree. The Barbarian Sorcerer introduced himself as Hua Man, and tonight, he would be lighting up the beacon of fire. With his immense power, he conjured a wave of fire that could contend with a massive tsunami. This sea of flames was heading for God Tree himself, aiming to burn the entire forest, including its propagator. Of course, God Tree just scoffed at such an arrogant display of destructiveness, but he admitted that the strength of these barbarians was not half bad. God Tree did not even have to move to deal with the wave of fire. Gold Silk Monkey and his trusty staff had it covered. After winding up in mid-air, he used Big Dipper's swirl to swallow the flames into the tip of his staff. Taking control of the wave, he parried it back to where it came from flawlessly. Seeing the fire's tsunami bouncing back to them, the sorcerer was at a loss for words. But the Imperial Barbarians on the platform stood tall, unbothered by the incoming wave as a barrier protected everyone. The smile on the Barbarian Emperor's mouth deepened with interest. He ordered his troops to never let their guard down, as they had never faced a stronger foe before. Behind Gold Silk Monkey, the dimension of fire opened, and the former commanders of Australia's beast force emerged. With 2 more powerful beasts appearing, the Imperial Barbarians were quite surprised. Suddenly, one of God Tree's roots sprouted right in front of the platform. The root twisted and morphed into a humanoid form to confront the Emperor. He was impressed by the fact that the barbarians still targeted him, knowing who he was. These brutes did not show up to help humanity in the fight against darkness, but they dared to disturb him right now. The Emperor just laughed at him, thinking that the humans who showed up back then were just sending themselves to their deaths. Seeing as these barbarians only cared about themselves, God Tree finally decided to act. In just a few seconds, he flooded the area with a thick blanket of mist, lowering their perception. Behind the mist came the terrifying gaze of God Tree's void assassin. Leon burst onto the scene by taking out one of the barbarians in a single slash. What followed can only be described as a massacre, courtesy of snake and boar beasts. While the barbarians were struggling with the mist's debilitating effects, the beasts were free to pick them off one by one. With this, God Tree's hunt had officially begun. Using his roots and branches in the shape of hands, he destroyed the platform holding the Imperial Barbarian royalty. The arrogant Emperor didn't want to waste time. He wanted to fight against the mutant tree's main body directly.
Stop it. Get some help.
And so, he left the Misty Mountain beasts to his subordinates while he jumped behind enemy lines. There, he met God Tree's avatar and swiftly brought out his weapon of choice. Using his humongous spiked club, he deleted God Tree's avatar without a problem. These barbarians were warmongers. The sorcerer named Hua Man, their great priest, and all their elite fighters shared the same fearless behavior. The most intense among them was the bloodthirsty Emperor. God Tree welcomed the challenge, looking forward to the chance to plunge the arrogant Emperor into despair. The barbarian Emperor continued his rush, seemingly flying from a single leap. The next thing in his path was the Kangaroo Mist. This one got the first attack off, but was easily dodged. Chaining another punch, the Emperor raised his club to block. It was so impactful that it sent the barbarian flying, hitting one of God Tree's branches. After reaching its current level, the Undying Mist Beast had obtained the strength of a mid-stage transcendent fourth order. So, what would happen if another one were to appear to confront the Emperor? Let's find out. Keep in mind that these mist beasts are practically immortal. Since that was the case, the Emperor started busting out the big guns. Using his aura, he manifested a beast avatar. This was the barbarian race's totem ability. With a lion and an elephant incarnation, the Emperor tried to charge forward again. Godtree found it interesting, but that was it. Meanwhile, the other Imperial barbarians were going toe-to-toe with the Misty Mountain beasts. The collision was bloody, as both parties pushed themselves to the limit. Thankfully, the Ice Dragon was there to be the great equalizer, freezing most of the barbarians in a single attack. This could have continued for a while, until a half-moon slash interrupted the dominant show of abilities. It came from the barbarian priestess and her staff. To answer back, Ice Dragon attacked with Frigid Frost Soul. The priestess immediately put up the Descent of the Sun God, a defensive spell. The whole field turned into an ice sculpture, the status of the priestess unknown. Back in the main event, the barbarian Emperor was cooking with his totem beasts. The lion and the elephant were formidable enough to break free from the mist beasts. Even when other beasts came as reinforcements, the Emperor never stopped laughing like a crazed warrior. He was laser-focused on turning Godtree's body into a source of untold treasures to harvest. He intended to dig Godtree's whole body out, to make him the barbarian race's sacred heirloom. To do that, he would have to somehow bypass the lethal flying leaf blades. Using his spiked club, he did what he did best, brute-forcing his way out of trouble. Finally, after multiple obstacles, the Emperor reached Godtree's main body. As a treat, Godtree morphed a fraction of his being into his humanoid form. The Emperor found Godtree's musings about the morality of humans questionable. Discussing these concepts would be more convenient in a humanoid form, but he could also just use his usual horrific god-like construct if necessary. When the Emperor kept on yapping about taking Godtree back as the barbarian's sacred item, Godtree looked at the puny human, like a deity looking down on an ant. This glare definitely made the Emperor recoil a little bit. At the start of this war, Godtree was wondering if there was any possibility of coexisting with the barbarians. But he finally realized that it was just wishful thinking. Other than using force to suppress them, nothing else would work. This applies not just to the barbarian race. Humans and beasts are the same. They just can't wait to cut his body up and use him as a treasure. Before, Godtree wondered if he had become too ruthless with all the wars he was involved in. But now he knew that foreign powers would only grow more powerful, and he would have no way out without his ruthlessness. The Emperor pretty much confirmed this thought. He even added that there would come a day when Godtree would be pushed to the brink of death, and his own beast army would turn their fangs on their master. But Godtree had changed. He had now adapted some of darkness's nature. For the sake of survival, he could become a selfish scoundrel who would kill indiscriminately. The first victim of this changed perspective was the barbarian Emperor himself. After fighting valiantly, the barbarian was one-shotted by a piercing root. The fearsome warrior felt just like that, but barbarians weren't labeled as a legendary race for nothing. Suddenly, the Emperor stood up, wielding an even greater force. Godtree had already expected a trump card, as he could feel a faint ancient breath from the Emperor earlier. Maybe the barbarian had awakened the ancient bloodline at the doors of the afterlife. Nevertheless, his attacks were more fearsome than before. Godtree was down to play for a little bit more, though. While the war in Africa was raging on in the space above the entire Milky Way galaxy, a pair of ice-cold eyes appeared. Its galactic crimson glare was focused on the little blue planet called Earth. The eye noticed that Gujit had disappeared, meaning he was defeated by some life form on a tiny planet. It blinked and pondered just how insignificant every other existence was.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Back in the war, the boost from the ancient bloodline made the Emperor the ultimate fighter. He was relentlessly going on the offensive against Godtree's combat-oriented form. His strength was on a whole other level, enough to be considered the strongest human Yu Ziyu had ever met. But what made him even more deadly was his sheer intensity and spirit. He was a pure fighter, risking his life for the thrill of it all. But that also made the Emperor prone to openings that Godtree could exploit. Even so, he would just grit his teeth through the pain and bounce back with his spiked club in hand, ready for another round. Drawing deep from his ancient bloodline reserves, he turned the heat up to an even higher level. Channeling all the wild energy within, he sent a high explosive strike rampaging towards his target. Godtree tried to block the initial impact, but he did not come out unscathed. Just the wind pressure alone was enough to scratch through his tough skin. Then came the main attack, a winding amalgamation of pure destructive energy. To test out his durability, Godtree gladly received the ultimate form of pure offense, with arms wide open. He did it just for the sake of showing that even an ultimate attack didn't warrant alarm. This bruised the Emperor's ego. Clicking his tongue, he shifted back to a more direct approach, only to get bloodily repelled by a punch. After coughing up blood, Godtree grabbed him with a death grip. At this range, the Emperor pulled out another trump card, transforming his spiked club into an organic weapon. With a swing of the seemingly alive weapon, it opened its jaws to chomp on Godtree. But Yu Ziyu easily shattered the organic weapon to pieces with a swing of his arms. Without giving the Emperor room to breathe, he slammed his legs down for a fatal kick. It made the Emperor slide on the floor on his back. It had been a while since Godtree had engaged in hand-to-hand combat, so he was having a hard time with coordination. Nevertheless, his rusty skills were enough to put the barbarian on the back foot. The disparity between their strength should be apparent for anyone to see, yet the Emperor still kept on standing and putting up a fight, even with his weapon destroyed. This battle maniac was just happy to fight against the strongest life form on the planet. Even if he died doing so, he would have no regrets. Most people who faced Yu Ziyu in the past would either retreat or wouldn't come near him in the first place. So he was starting to admire the Emperor now. In order to show his respect, he decided to mess around and let the barbarian witness his true power, the form he used to vanquish darkness itself. With a deafening roar, he made the entire area screech to a halt. His winding branches scooped up the Emperor, constricting his body with crushing tightness. The ultimate warrior felt fear at the presence of boundless spiritual power. Staring the fool in the eye, this was Godtree's way of killing all hope left within the Emperor. He did not finish the fight right away, though he continued flexing his power by cleaning up the battlefield as the Emperor watched. Godtree's roots and branches extended throughout the entire war zone, quickly picking up the African beasts helplessly. They tried to resist capture, but the roots and branches were way too tough. They were inescapable. Just like that, the war in Africa was wrapped up in a few seconds. Back in Europe, they had developed some sort of clairvoyant espionage power to determine that Godtree had begun the African conquest just a few days after Australia. In the 10 Nations Alliance, the bishop could also feel the fluctuations of the mutant tree's power from continents away. Godtree stood at the peak of his power, under the moonlit sky. He made the barbarian Emperor watch as the African beasts lowered their heads and submitted to their new lord. This was a display of dominance. No one else could perform other than Yu Ziyu. And so, Godtree asked if the barbarian Emperor was still holding onto the desire to fight him. The brute could only gnash his teeth in silence.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Holding the barbarian in his tight grip, Godtree could feel the Emperor's will to fight dissipate. It would be a waste to kill him. So into the dimension of life he went. While Godtree was busy adding another fighter to his collection, the dimension of thunder suddenly opened. Distracted, the three Beast Stooges failed to prepare for another Beast's fierce sneak attack. Fortunately for them, the calmer that just emerged from the thunder dimension was there to bail them out of trouble. Demon Cow had reached the fourth order of transcendence, turning his horns into a crescent bull horn, emanating the sheer power of thunder. Another one of Godtree's generals had leveled up immensely. After saving the three Stooges, Demon Cow immediately paid respects to his master. But since he arrived late and the war had already wrapped up, he had no one to test his newfound strength on. After the impressive breakthrough, with the crescent bullhorn becoming his true weapon and the gravitational black hole, he had become an absolute powerhouse. Turning to the side, Godtree tasked Ninetails with herding the defeated enemies, willing to join their side into the dimensions. Under the bright moonlit sky, he could not help but think about the laurel tree that he planted on the moon. Since he just gained a lot of free time, it was about time to take a look by extending his senses up to the moon. In a short amount of time, Laurel Tree had already reached the fourth order. It might be because it was the only living organism on the moon. Nevertheless, its rapid growth was quite the good news. Back on the surface, Sparky came up to the big boss to report their casualties to be around 10% of their forces. But they had also managed to capture 8 African powerhouses alive, encasing them in ice. The number alarmed Godtree. At the start of the war, he felt 9 powerhouses trudge forward. Extending his branch to a hidden part of the battlefield, he quickly spotted the remaining uncaptured powerhouse. The cowardly mutated soaring serpent immediately started crying out for his life, even though he possessed some of the most noxious poisons in the world. Not only that, but his scales could also blend into space, effectively hiding his aura. Godtree quickly chucked the serpent into the dimension of life, making a mental note to check in on the poisonous beast later. Sparky was put in charge of delivering life essence to the injured as they enter a phase of rest and recovery. Next up on the docket was spending the millions of evolution points God Tree had banked. Flying Leaf Blade, one of his main offensive moves, had to go first. To reach level 5, he had to spend 10 million points in one go. As soon as the upgrade was confirmed, its power and sharpness poured into his body. Excited to give it a try, he swung his vines and produced a fearsome burst of strength. The Flying Leaf Blade took the form of a crosscut, traveling to the skies. It was so oppressive that the air in the area got sucked into it. God Tree watched in shock as his test attack broke through the atmosphere and flew into the vastness of space without stopping. The system renamed the technique the Sky-Splitting Blade, unlocking 1% comprehension of the path of the Vanguard. Although unfamiliar with this concept, such a powerful attack came at only 1% of skill comprehension. Just how powerful would it become if he reached 100? On the other side of the world, in the Sky City of Freedom Federation, the global summit had just begun. Yuli spoke of humanity's growth as 18 humans entered the Fourth Order of Transcendence after the war. Still, they needed to discuss the rise of mutant beasts. Vatican's St. Ilya brought up the fact that Australia was cooked and Africa was an unknown factor. Not to mention, the South Pole continent was out of reach. Freedom Federation's representative, Alan, took the chance to take a jab at Asia for always being on the losing end against mere beasts. Hearing that diss, the veteran Asian soldiers stared daggers at the arrogant man. Instead of apologizing and pulling back, Alan actually doubled down on the insults. This Alan dude wants all the smoke when we haven't even seen his ass on the front lines. Hearing that nobody talking trash about Asia made even Xiao Ling fired up. So were the rest of the warriors who had fought against Beast Tide after Beast Tide. Yuli had to step in and make Alan stop acting like an ass, as this was not the time for provocations. Intimidated by Yuli's power, Alan backed down. White Elephant wanted to teach the man a lesson, but it wasn't really worth it. Grasping a spirit leaf in her hand, Xiao Ling contacted God Tree. Since the spirit minds of Africa had all been seized and completely absorbed, the dimensions of fire and earth had expanded to the size of a small city. He also started cultivating spirit flowers and herbs in each corresponding elemental dimension. God Tree reckoned that reaching the 100,000 meter mark would start attracting extraterrestrial creatures to his domains, making a miniature world. After extensive rallying, Ninetails had also finished putting every beast back into the dimensions. With their business in Africa wrapped up, it was about time to go. Meanwhile, Sky City's International Summit continued. One of the representatives brought up the fact that the mutant tree contributed the most in the last war, saving humanity from extinction twice now. With the tree's abnormal growth, none of them could hope to catch up, let alone surpass him. Humanity would not benefit from trying to go against him. Moreover, the mutant tree took over 3 cities in Huaxia and never harmed its citizens. As long as humanity doesn't foolishly wage war, they should be fine. That's when Alan came in to run his mouth about the other representatives being too scared of the mutant tree.
Huh?
Xiao Ling dared the arrogant man to challenge the tree. He really wanted some trouble. Frustrated and too dumb to cook up a clever response, Alan gnashed his teeth. Thankfully, the more sensible representatives spoke in favor of peace, as they couldn't afford to sacrifice innocent lives when they didn't even have hopes of victory. The Saint concurred, as the citizens of the world were warming up to the idea of the mutant tree being their savior. Yuli finalized the agreement for humanity to steer clear of the mutant tree's business. At the same time, he felt a jolt of horror struck his mind. The more attentive warriors in the conference hall must have felt it as well. Dismissing that feeling, Yuli continued with the meeting. In one of Sky City's industrial buildings, a dimensional rift just opened out of nowhere. Yu Ziyu's roots slithered out, eventually shifting and morphing into a humanoid form. He jumped out of the building, making his presence known to everyone nearby. From above, he breathed in the view of the world's most technologically advanced country. It was a city of steel that could be used as a frightening war fortress. Yuli sent out an avatar to meet with God Tree's incarnation. He was pretty impressed that the master of magnetism was attentive enough to notice him so quickly. Yuli asked who this intruder was, but he already knew the answer to that. Nevertheless, God Tree's appearance in this city at this time could pose some problems. Closing his hand, God Tree destroyed Yuli's avatar, along with a nearby skyscraper to demand a real face-to-face discussion. At the podium of the conference, Yuli suffered the backlash of getting a part of his consciousness destroyed. Xiao Ling smiled as her master was finally setting some plans into motion again. Yuli looked up to the entire delegation, warning them that the strongest being on Earth had arrived. Godtree stepped foot on the destroyed building, continuing to take in the view of the city skyline. While Yuli was tweaking and throwing up blood, he warned the delegates of what was happening. The entire room immediately turned fearful, worried that the monster had come to take over Sky City's fortress. Sti Ling quietly scoffed at their terror. A transcendent knight felt his special sword cry out. Alan felt an unease he had never felt in his life before. Even the delegate from the Vatican could sense that the Lord was warning them of what was to come. There were no two ways about it. Yuli had to go out there and face the music. With his speed, it didn't take long to reach the outskirts of the city. The master of magnetism finally dragged his real body out, and he brought quite a few friends as well. Alan started sweating profusely, and his spirit power was suppressed just by being near the absolute beast. Blondie noticed this and started daring Alan to back up his words from earlier. Godtree assured everyone that he didn't come all the way out here for trouble. He had come to personally extend an invitation for Yuli to join his cause. Everyone was naturally shocked. Blondie knew he wasn't the one being invited, but even he was tempted. If Yuli accepted, Godtree would personally help him break through to the Fifth Order of Transcendence. The Fifth Order was a realm that no human had ever touched yet. Blondie was feeling more and more tempted. Being careful about what the deal might entail, Yuli inquired why he was chosen specifically. Ignoring the question, Godtree found it irksome that these humans were flying over him and forcing him to look up. So he knocked them down below his eye level using sheer aura. It wasn't a proper technique, just a showcase of the difference in their spiritual power. Unsurprisingly, Godtree's secret agents present were not affected by the spiritual pressure. Yuli was already familiar with Godtree's immense power, as he had felt it from afar before. But being subjected to it directly was a different story. He could feel the disparity between a transcendent human and a godlike being, something that words alone could not express. With these daring humans kneeling before him, Godtree found them much more pleasing to the eye. From a distance, a hooded figure sensed the commotion and praised Godtree's wave-like power. Humans were already helpless against a mere Sea Dragon King invasion. If the tree wanted, he could wipe everyone out without much effort. The hooded figure suddenly felt a splitting headache as the space contorted heavily. It seemed like Hoodie here had just received some sort of order from a mysterious presence. With a wave of a hand, Hoodie opened a dimensional rift connecting to Godtree's main body. Unaware, Godtree's incarnation continued his conversation with Yuli, expressing his desire to help protect the fortress in exchange for lending him Yuli's power. Godtree promised that Yuli's city would become an independent kingdom. From the side, Blondie was practically blushing with jealousy at such a tasty deal. Get Blondie a contract too? He might be the best glazer of all time. But Yuli knew that nothing in life came for free. So, he asked if joining the Misty Mountain would mean surrendering the rights to all of the city's spirit mines. Considering Godtree's enticing deal, that was a small price to pay for excellence. Yuli finally agreed to join the extensive roster of Misty Mountain. We got Budget Magneto and the team before GTA 6. The other delegates understood why the Master of Magnetism agreed to the terms. They would have, too, if such an offer had been extended to them. Instead of finalizing the deal, Godtree's attention shifted to his main body, as his void had just been breached. The hooded figure had somehow opened a portal, invading his space. Hoodie didn't take advantage of the stationary tree, simply observing. Finally, Yu Ziyu's consciousness returned to thwart the intruder. He confronted Hoodie, demanding to know their identity and how they managed to break into his private space. Instead of answering, Hoodie charged forward, closing the gap and brandishing an attack without uttering a word. Godtree responded with his roots, trying to trap and block the intruder, but Hoodie's speed was far too fast. He could tell for sure that Hoodie was human, but that reaction speed was anything but. With an open palm, Hoodie began coalescing a pure white energy. Repositioning to a spot where they could deal the most damage, the hooded figure introduced themselves as the Guardian of Humanity. With one swift motion, the Guardian unleashed a massive impact attack, trampling Godtree's sturdy body. The attack was so powerful that it managed to damage his crystallized form. This Guardian was definitely formidable. She might seem human, but she was surely not ordinary. Her speed and strength were too abnormal. Godtree couldn't help but sense hints of darkness in her fighting style. He didn't like this feeling of unease at all. They couldn't afford another crisis right now. Raising her hand, the Guardian manipulated the spirit power in the air, calmly preparing another attack. It only took her a few seconds to create a massive cyclone of pure destructive energy. The accumulation of so much spirit power began to shatter the space around them. As the Guardian launched the hurricane of spinning death, she awaited God Tree's response. He quickly summoned his draconic roots, which roared with intensity. The roots opened their jaws and started swallowing the harrowing hurricane whole. Even the mysterious Guardian was surprised by such an unconventional response. While the draconic root handled the defense, the rest of the fearsome tendrils launched a counterattack. At point-blank range, one of the tendrils baptized the Guardian with overwhelming force. Then came the other three, overwhelming the intruder with pure physicality. Once the perfect counter settled, the mysterious woman stood firm without a hint of injury. God Tree tried to use appraisal on her, but couldn't discern anything about her identity or abilities. Since that was the case, perhaps the more powerful heavenly eye could reveal the truth. Even with it, he could only see the special ability called Vessel and her unknown race. Perhaps she wasn't human after all. Maybe the one he was fighting wasn't the enemy's true form, just a vessel being used to carry out the main body's wishes. Curious, God Tree began interrogating the intruder about her goal in entering his domain. She admitted she was just curious about how powerful the one who defeated darkness was. She considered this fight a small test. That didn't change the fact that this mysterious woman had already far surpassed every other creature on the planet in terms of power. She asserted that her race was not important, and that the reason she came was to express gratitude to Yu Ziyu for protecting the planet and to deliver a thank you gift. In her hand was a golden strand of her origin. It was an artifact meant to aid God Tree in his metamorphosis, helping him step into the sixth order of transcendence. He thought the sixth order was an insurmountable wall, yet here was a mysterious person gifting him a shortcut. The Guardian also extended a friendly warning that the fight with darkness was just the beginning. At that moment, the deepest part of the cosmos was on the verge of an unprecedented eruption. With that catastrophe would come an existence, much more terrifying than mere darkness. Just when God Tree thought he was in the clear, the stakes suddenly went intergalactic. This is literally peak.
Someone cooked here.
Having a hard time believing what he just heard, God Tree rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't having a nightmare. As soon as he opened them back up, the mysterious Guardian was already gone. The cosmic phantom he briefly saw must be that woman's main body. And those words of warning she spoke struck a chord inside him. What was left of their interaction was the strand of origin essence. It seems he can't take his foot off the gas yet, as there's yet another reason to get stronger. Back in Sky City, things had ground to a halt as his humanoid form suddenly stopped moving. He had to use his full consciousness to stand up against the mysterious intruder, after all. Every delegate just stayed put, holding their breaths, confused as hell. Alan reckoned that the God Tree was full of openings right now, and this might be an excellent chance to strike and make a name for himself.
Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
If he could take down the mutant tree, he might earn the respect of those who look down on him. And so, with his fourth order transcendent power, he decided to risk everything with all his might. Alan glimmered with an aura full of vitality. Screaming at the top of his lungs, the fool made his move. Of course, the rest of the delegation looked at him like he was a lunatic. Alan didn't care, he would charge in, and he wouldn't care if anyone got caught in the crossfire. With all of his might, Alan attacked. Xiao Ling just watched from the sidelines, letting the fool dig his grave. Alan's green aura eventually coalesced into a fearsome claw. He wanted respect and recognition so badly that he would resort to such dirty tactics. With a single attack, his strength exploded, shaving the top of the tower clean off. He might be a crazy fool trying to gain fame, but the strength of the fourth order transcendent was undeniable. The delegates, including Yu Li, had to block against the impact of their proximity. The dust eventually started settling, revealing a sight to behold. Everyone watched as Alan got skewered by the roots, his life leaving his mortal body in an instant. God Tree had just returned after dealing with a Guardian, and nonchalantly apologized for going silent for a minute. He tossed Alan's corpse like garbage, deeming the fool deserving of death. Now, it's time for Yu Li to finalize the joining of forces. God Tree opened one of his dimensions, exuding immense vitality. Gold Mask asked Yu Li if he was really willing to betray humanity when he was the biggest proponent of unity. But Yu Li understood that if humanity wanted to survive, they needed to always search for a new way out. This was his. Without a semblance of hesitation, he entered the dimensional rift. With his business in Sky City settled, God Tree opened another rift in space to go back home. Throughout the whole process, he didn't even look in the direction of the other transcendent humans, deeming them insignificant. The rift he made connected directly to the moon, with God Tree's consciousness back in his main body, utilizing his ability to manipulate space. Me traveling to the moon very convenient. There, Laurel Tree could finally meet the master for the first time since he was a seedling. God Tree commented on how small the Laurel Tree was, fully aware that he was abnormally huge. Showering Laurel with the essence of life, God Tree excused himself for a minute as he had to handle some business. But if he could stay on the moon without needing to breathe, he still activated Tree World Advent to spread some green on the lunar surface. In just a few seconds, a sea of trees spawned, making the barren and cratered surface look much better. The moon was also the perfect site to attempt to break through to the 6th order using the strand. He might not get there all at once, but he reached the peak of the 5th order at the very least. And so began his breakthrough, making the moon light up with rich spiritual power. At this moment, something big was occurring within the cosmos. Taking root within the vastness of empty space was the final form of the sacred divine tree, a being that possessed the supreme creation technique. It was so massive that its body supported the universe itself. It depended on devouring planets and heavenly bodies for nutrients. Everybody gangsta, until the real God Tree shows up. On each of its leaves were records of every creature's life. As a life ended, a leaf withered, making way for a new one to sprout. A sacred divine tree had been lying dormant for millions of years, but had now awakened due to the battle between Yu Ziyu and darkness. Yu Ziyu's breakthrough on the moon served as the final nail to awaken it fully. With its all-seeing eye open, its strength started growing at a terrifying rate. Back on the moon, God Tree's physical form had started molding itself into a different shape. The increase in his spiritual power capacity was so drastic that he had to open the 9 dimensions to support the growth. Much to his surprise, the separate dimensions representing each element started merging before his eyes. By the end of the process, the 9 dimensions had merged into a single giant singularity. With it came a qualitative change in his heavenly eye. He worried that the sudden merge would plunge the dimensions into chaos, so he had to check. Inside, he found a tree connecting the elemental dimensions, merging them into one, and then splitting them up again. This brought on a stronger connection between different elements, opening endless possibilities. The size increase in each space wasn't anything to scoff at either, as a real merge would probably turn his personal domain into a real living and breathing world. Laurel congratulated him on his breakthrough, but God Tree hadn't stepped into the realm of 6th order transcendence yet. His body's power capacity was so massive that he only managed to reach the mid-stage of the 5th order. That was with the use of half the strand of origin. In due time, he would use the other half to make the leap. While he was busy assessing his growth, he didn't notice the divine eye looking down on him with curiosity. Noticing its crimson presence seemingly looking into his soul, God Tree felt dread like never before. The owner of the eye finally found the one who defeated Gujit, also known as Darkness. Laurel nervously asked his master what kind of creature the eye belonged to. Feeling disrespected, the eye stared at Laurel, and the mere gaze set him ablaze with the flames of annihilation. As the fire grew larger and stronger, God Tree tried his hardest to stop the spread. He countered the flames using his improved ice age. The spikes of ice encased Laurel as he pleaded to be saved. But a mere ice age wasn't enough to extinguish the persistent flames. They eventually started spreading rapidly, reaching Yu Ziyu's main body. While he tried his best to fight off the blaze, he asked the eye what its deal was. It just continued staring him down, labeling him as an insignificant mutant tree. From its iris came a thin beam of untold power. Along with the inextinguishable fire, Yu Ziyu was plunged into ruin. That thin beam of red light rampaged through the moon, carving its surface up like a hot knife through butter. After cleanly slicing the moon in half, its total destruction was imminent. The moon exploded into a billion tiny pieces of space debris. Then Yu Ziyu woke up, cold sweat dripping from his body. At first, he was confused. He clearly felt his life slipping away from the beam and the fire, but his body was still intact. He hadn't died, and Laurel wasn't burnt to a crisp. From an outside perspective, Laurel was just confused as to why he was suddenly plunged into a daze. It finally made sense now. Everything that happened with that crimson eye was just an elaborate illusion. Bro got played by a genjutsu user. God Tree had never been played like that before. The experience was so vivid that it felt all too real. The enemies in the cosmos are playing a whole different ballgame than him. They are horrifying existences that far surpass darkness. He was reminded of the warning the Guardian gave him. He was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. In this universe, he's just an insignificant speck under the microscope of the real players. He can't wait for a more optimal time to absorb the remaining half of the strand of origin. God Tree needed to get stronger as fast as he could to prepare for whatever cosmic horrors lay in wait. In the deeper parts of the universe, in places beyond anyone's sight, there are enemies beyond his current comprehension. His newfound resolve to break through quickly showed results. Laurel could feel his master's spiritual aura growing at unprecedented speeds, becoming more terrifying every second. His draconic roots were also going haywire as the drastic increase put a strain on every root. With a formidable roar, one of the roots seemingly gained limbs. As his breakthrough defied the laws of the universe, a galactic lightning tribulation began, descending from the ether to strike Yu Ziyu down. It was something he had never experienced before. The tribulation's electrifying power coursed through his body. Resisting it was borderline impossible. It was so destructive that his tough exterior began to break. Yu Ziyu's entire frame was plunged into a state of constant destruction and immediate regeneration. His limbs roared in pain, as the tribulation proved more brutal than anything he could imagine. Thankfully, he decided to use the moon as his breakthrough site, as the lightning might have destroyed a significant portion of the planet if he had done it there. After an extended period of excruciating agony, the dust finally settled, revealing a solidified root system in the form of a tribulation lightning-filled dragon. Laurel stared in shock at his master's new form. Godtree was big before, but his current size was far greater. Additionally, his core had gained a single horn, with a tinge of crimson at its tip. It's safe to say that he liked the new form, and the additional red horn added an edgy touch. His main root had transformed into an azure dragon. It might look like a legendary beast, but its capabilities far surpassed the dragon race. Within its claws, energy balls overflowing with the power to annihilate gathered. These constantly growing divine energy balls are made of the power of life itself, dealing amplified damage to dark attribute monsters and undead creatures. Based on its current concentration, a single ball should be enough to wipe out an entire continent.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Laurel excitedly asked if he had finally made the step into the Sixth Order. But as expected, he fell a little short, only reaching the peak of the Fifth. Yet, with his 9 dimensions constantly expanding, his overall battle power should be utterly terrifying. It's just that the final step into the Sixth Order was impossibly difficult. When he returns to Earth, he needs to find that Guardian again to gain some clarity regarding the cosmic situation. There's also the matter of the planet he discovered in the void before. That alien domain should be worth investigating. As for the Undine Laurel, its immortal body should be enough to replace him as the divine tree of Earth if he needed to travel to faraway domains. But before that, he needed to consolidate the powerhouses on Earth and continue recruiting new companions. Using his void route, interstellar travel to the moon and back shouldn't be a problem. As for the air, it's still really thin right now, but his beast generals shouldn't have a problem breathing here. But just to be safe, he established an illusionary world dome covering the entire sea of trees. This should make the air problem less prevalent. Another issue was gravity, as he couldn't go overboard and affect the gravitational relations between the Earth and the moon. That's a problem for Demon Cav to solve, as that guy had a better grasp of gravity than anyone else. With his plan laid out in his mind, it was about time to call this army to their new home base. Opening the dimensions, the beasts of Misty Mountain started pouring out into the foreign land. They looked up to see the cosmos in the open, confused as to where their master had taken them. White Tiger got too excited and flew too far out. Thankfully, Godtree was there to restrain him. The battle-hungry Sparky's first thought was to split the strange space open. He would have done it if the boss hadn't stopped him. Godtree finally managed to sit them down and explain that they were currently standing on the surface of the moon. He only called a few trusted beasts for now, as he needed them to take care of something. After receiving their tasks, Godtree transported them back to Earth's surface, to their homeland, Misty Mountain. Ninetails took charge and reminded everyone to split up and do their respective jobs properly. For now, they would be in charge of earthly matters, while Godtree dealt with more significant things in space. First, he needed to find a way to make the moon more habitable for his subordinates. But before that, there was one more thing that needed his attention. So, he opened the dimension of mist. Inside, the undying mist beasts immediately paid their respects to the big boss. This was the dimension where he stashed Yu Li to cultivate and train with the mist beasts. Looking at this man's tools, Godtree was quite impressed. He was a powerful attacker with extreme speed and even invisibility to boot. If Yu Li fought Xiaoling right now, she would have had a hard time safely retreating. Godtree asked Yu Li why he thought he had been roped into the team. The reason was plain and simple. His unparalleled ability to control magnetism was a priceless asset for future battles. But for now, Yu needed to harness his magnetic force to create a wormhole that could lead an entire army across the starry skies. The amount of spirit energy required to do such a thing would be immense, but God Tree assured Yu that he would have his full support. In the future, there would be no more trivial skirmishes like the ones on Earth. Something much bigger is brewing, and battles of cosmic proportions will become the norm. For now, Yu needed some more training, and the dimension of thunder would be the perfect place to expand his spiritual power capacity. Yu Ziyu must think of more ways to strengthen Yuli's control over magnetism, to create wormholes. He will be a cornerstone of the army in the fights across the universe. From the moon, let's dive back into Earth and even deeper into the depths of the ocean. The powerhouses of the ocean floor were at an impasse as they looked at a long-lost comrade popping up after an extended absence. The mermaid clan was especially incensed, as their leader and sister, Elsa, had returned. When the Sea Kings were fighting against the mutant tree, she was a no-show. Her kin had long since treated her as a shame to their family. And now she had come down here as a representative of Misty Mountain, as an enemy. But her goal was not to start a fight. She came back to urge her clan to join Misty Mountain too. Speaking of Misty Mountain, the beasts on land were busy with their respective assignments as well. Divine Flower tagged along with the Great Ape to pick out promising beasts among their clan, determining some with the strength and intelligence to reach the Third Order. But the leader himself, the Great Ape, was quite picky when it came to choosing promising apes. Xiao Lan and Lung Feng's sister were discussing why the Great White Ape had a tail when he was not supposed to have one. Eventually, Divine Flower managed to separate a few talented apes from the bunch to lead them to a special training spot, surprising Qinggang. She proudly stood at the forefront of the stoic gorillas, ready to train for their breakthrough. As for Qinggang, it looked like he was working on a particular side project, away from everyone, piquing Divine Flower's curiosity. Using his power, he lifted a vast piece of land and painstakingly built a city on top of it. After God Tree left Misty Mountain, there was a void left behind in his usual spot, so Qinggang built a castle that he had longed for since he was a little boy. Divine Flower praised him for his ability and creativity, and he promised to save a special room for her in return. She then requested a bigger room so she could sleep with a handsome little panda at night. Hearing that instantly shattered Qinggang's fragile heart. Clueless of Qinggang's feelings for her, Divine Flower cheerfully skipped away as little bro cried his eyes out. To make matters worse, little panda also received news of the castle and came to request a room. Qinggang immediately started beating little panda up as his ape homies cheered him on. During his time of preparations, immune elephants subdued from Africa were tasked with transporting spirit ores of different elements to the moon. Yu Ziyu then carefully buried these ores under the moon's surface, creating reserves that would eventually thrive as the rich spirit energy of the moon nourished them. After that, he also created a giant pit filled with a pure distillation of the essence of life. Using the Tree World Advent, Yu Ziyu expanded the reach of his domain, covering the surface of the moon. Currently, Gregory can be seen from Earth, altering its appearance drastically. Yu Ziyu had been living like an old farmer, tilling his land these past few days. For a moment, he felt happy toiling away and preparing the new home base. But he reckoned that the essence of life's spiritual lake might not be sufficient for everyone's use. The solution was quick and easy: divert even more vitality-filled water directly from the dimension of life. He might have even gone a little overboard, forming a decent-sized lake on the moon's surface. At least he was confident that the size was big enough to accommodate everyone. Still, he felt like something was missing. So he turned to Laurel for answers. Laurel could now use moonlight projection to reach out and summon Qinggang and the apes over. The summons also included Demon Cow, Emperor Alligator, Ice Dragon, and everyone else stationed on Earth. He laid down the foundation of their operation, but he'll need his building team for the moon's reconstruction. Meanwhile, White Tiger was currently embroiled in an intense shouting match with the Phoenix Demon. They literally butted heads, refusing to back down against one another. Their fight seemed serious and was quickly devolving into a brutal face-off to the death. White Tiger kept on repeating his catchphrase, "Everyone will die," and the Phoenix was having none of it. Shooting a pillar of flames, White Tiger quickly maneuvered out of the way. He did not realize that had he been hit, he would have been obliterated, as the beam had the power of a nuclear blast. The Phoenix Demon was pissed and was not planning to let White Tiger off the hook. Why the hell are they fighting in the first place?